You're listening to the uMentor Talk Show, now available on the Umoja app. I'm your host, Imran Dharamsi, and on this weekly talk show, well, almost weekly, we invite professionals and teenagers to take us through their journeys and to give us advice. We took a break for a few weeks, but we are happy to be back and back at it for everyone who listens to our show. And we hope that you appreciate the new changes in format that we're making. If you have any feedback on that, you can email us at mentor@umojaoutreach.org, or you can submit it on the Inspire platform. Also, if you have any questions for our panelists, you can always leave them on the Inspire app, which is, as we mentioned every show, a question and answer platform for career advice in our Shia community. So, as a rising professional, you can ask for great advice from other professionals in our community. And as a mentor, you can give advice to our community's future professionals. And that's available via the Umoja app with an Emoji account on Android and iOS. And then one other thing we wanted to mention, we are able to share weekly, almost weekly, stories of inspiring professionals, students, and community organizations only because of the generous support of listeners and viewers like you listening now. So please consider supporting us at umojareach.org/donate or through the Umoja app. Every little bit goes a long way in opening career doors for our youth and connecting our community. So we thank you for that. Okay, now on to today's speaker. Today's speaker is Brother Qaim Naqvi. He is an environmental science student, graduate, from the University of Illinois. And he has experience working in a variety of different areas of environmental conservation. That includes ecological research and also trail work, which I'm sure he'll tell us a lot more about his recent experiences. And then one of his long-term goals is to bring greater environmental consciousness into the Islamic community. So really excited for this show, and let's welcome our speaker. Salam Brother Khan, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I wanted to just start with why are you interested in environmental science? Because it's something we haven't had a lot of people who are interested in that come on the show. So if you could just speak to that, what's so great about environmental science?
Yeah. I think a love of environmental science kind of comes at a young age. I've had a lot of experiences in the forests behind my house when I was a kid. My father used to travel to Denver, Colorado, so he took us there, and so I got to experience the mountains. And just a love for wildlife. I would catch snakes in my backyard, things like that. So I've always enjoyed working with animals. Ever since I was young, I thought I'd be like a biologist or something along those lines. So, but yeah, and then also comes like a concern for like climate change related issues and other things that like affect me deeply. And if I look towards my future, and if you seen the like IPCC climate report that just came out, the future looks kind of bleak if you stare at it too long. So, but I don't believe that you should just like curl up and wait to die. So I think it says a lot about humanity, or just people in general, that they're willing to fight for a solution to these problems that like they don't really know if there are any solutions.
That's interesting. Could you actually talk a bit more about that? I know that's not something we really went into in the pre-interview, but that last piece you said was very interesting.
Well, like, I don't know. The scientists are environmental science can be I'd say like the dark side is looking at what we've done to the environment and trying to like mitigate the effects and like look forward. And a lot of times the news can be very like defeating because there's no like right answer. I mean, the right answer is like cut carbon emissions and like transform the world's energy system immediately.
Of course, yeah.
Like that's if you want to like stop, well, you can't really stop climate change. The problem is it's already in motion, and there's something called like a delay effect, basically, where we're being affected by the carbon that was released some decades ago, and then what we release now, they'll feel it some decades later. It's like a delay. Yeah. And so like knowing that it can seem kind of scary, and there's no magical like thing that technology that can remove all the carbon in the atmosphere yet. I'm not I'm not waiting with bated breath for that. So yeah, it's kind of scary, but
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of like room for growth in that. I think that a lot of advancements can be made in the field of environmental science and like sustainability when it comes to like from like electric cars to like transferring us from like coal power to solar power or wind power. There's a lot of potential. The question is, who's willing to, invest in that kind of potential, or, if it's a political problem,
Hmm.
if environmental science becomes a political issue, then like who's willing to fund it on like political grounds as well.
Right. And we'll definitely talk a lot more about those specific issues in a bit. But back to you personally. So I know a lot of people, they're perhaps interested in environmentalism, or maybe they do some advocacy on the side. How did you decide to make environmental science like your thing that you're going to pursue as a career?
Yeah.
How did you make that leap, I guess? Because it is a
Mhm.
leap.
Well, I think uh, some of it has to do with me being interested in animals and like
Hmm.
in the environment since a young age, and that it was just me kind
Sure.
of
Yeah.
just continuing to do what I found interesting or like what I was curious about. Um, but I was actually thinking of going into art. I like do art as like a side thing. Like I do oil paintings and
Hmm.
drawings, all this stuff. And I was originally thinking of going to school for studio art, but I decided to switch to environmental science because I figure you can become an artist without having to go to art school, but you can't necessarily become a scientist without having to study science. But that's not to say anything bad about art school. Like I'm absolutely supportive of anyone who wants to do
Hmm.
that. Um, but it just seemed like something that I feel like I could have found more employment with. But we'll see. I'm still early on in my career, but something that I think
Right.
a field that's growing because of the modern current concern about environmental disasters and worsening climate effects. Like,
Mhm.
obviously, if people have like any uh, desire to solve these problems, environmental people are who they're gonna hire or who they're gonna go to.
Mm, right.
And I feel like
Yeah.
it's a position where a lot of people have like an emotional connection to what they're doing. Like I've never worked in another field, so I'm not really sure what the people's like connection to what they're working on is. But for me, people who work in the environmental field, especially like younger people, are very emotionally connected to what they're working on, and they feel like a spiritual connection to like I guess the basis, the mission of environmental science.
Right. Um, and we were also talking about, despite there being things that a lot of people are passionate about, like maybe, going into environmental science or going into being an electrician or being a welder, there's often a
Mm-hmm.
lot of stigma associated with like going into jobs that are deemed less than or
Mm-hmm.
inferior. But I put that in quotes because they're not. They actually like make the
Right.
backbone of our society.
Mm-hmm.
But I want like if you could give a little bit of your thoughts on that and how that affected uh,
Yeah.
your
Well,
choice.
yeah. Well, I just feel like I don't know, coming from uh, my parents are immigrants from India, and there's some pressure from the culture, not necessarily my parents, because they were supportive of me, even if I wanted to go to art
Mhm.
school, and that's I think is like extraordinary of them. But
Wow.
I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of pressure for us to be doctors, engineers. I mean, everyone kind of knows that like I guess stereotype, but I think it is to a point true where I think it's kind of like seen as like a status thing to be a doctor or an engineer, but it's obviously those are very important jobs, and if people want to do them, absolutely, like they're very important. But I think that other jobs are just as important. Things like like trades, like welding, plumbing. I mean, everyone needs a doctor when they get sick, but even a doctor needs a plumber when his toilet backs up. It's important work,
Yeah,
and
that's
it's,
a good
it's
point.
the backbone of, it's the backbone of society. If we didn't have people who took our trash out, we'd be living in
Hmm.
garbage. So they do a huge service to
Right.
us. But it's just because you're not going to college, you go to trade school instead, or maybe you don't go to any college, and you can still end up with a career if you know what you're doing, and if you're willing to fight for having that career, because you might feel pressure if you want to be an artist, or if you want to be a graphic designer, or I don't know, someone who works in a factory, whatever.
Hmm.
There's a lot. I think there might be some pushback because it's seen as like a I don't know, blue collar working class instead of some kind of like you don't make as much money, but I think a fulfilling job is what's more important than a well-paid job.
Right. Yeah. Of course, on this show, like we definitely agree with that, because we try to bring on speakers from, we do all sorts of different things. But
Mhm.
anyways, so thank you for that insight. And now back to just talking about you specifically. Can you take us through your like undergrad process? Which kind of courses did you take? Where'd you
Mhm.
study? And what did you think of your major specifically? Like, how was the experience?
Sure. So I went to before I went to the University of Illinois, I did 2 years at the College of DuPage, which is a community college in the Chicago area, Chicago suburbs.
Hmm.
Um, and I was able to get 60 credits for free from a scholarship. So I was able to do that and then
Oh, wow.
transfer to University of Illinois, where I finished my bachelor's. I got, I think, something really important. Actually, no, before I get to that, my major was good. I
Okay.
really enjoy it because
Okay.
it's kind of so there's a life science is really big in Illinois because of agriculture. There's
Hmm.
big like corn industry and soybean industry, but conservation is not as big. The major, so the major is kind of small, and you kind of get to know those other people in your classes because you see them very often. So it's a nice community, and the people are really passionate again about environmental. It's not like it's like the people who care about this stuff on their together post science because they care about it, even on their off time. And I like that
Hmm.
kind of passion. You make good friends. And I was able to work for one of the labs that's based in the University of Illinois as a research assistant, where I got some research experience. And I'm currently writing a research paper that was started off when I was working in that position. And also like doing, volunteering. Also, I mean, if you can, I'd say get like a lab assistant job if you're in college for environmental
Right.
science. But
Hmm.
you can. There's a lot of things you can do to help you get more experience. There's internships and there's volunteer. And as for classes, it's actually not as well. At least the school I went to, it's not a super technical major. But it depends
Oh,
on
okay.
what exactly you're doing because the environmental field is really big. You can go from like
Hmm.
environmental law to like someone who works on the ground spraying weeds, or someone who's like at like an executive level, like managing something. So it's very broad. But for me, which is like a conservation, which is kind of working on the ground on public land, it's more about like uh, you talk about like statistics and like wildlife population statistics. That's about as difficult as it gets. Softwares you have to use. Um, but yeah, sorry, I've
Okay.
been on a tangent.
I think you're I think
Mhm.
you're cutting out a little bit uh in terms of your audio, but that's okay. We'll
Oh,
keep going. So, yeah, I think it's okay now.
sure.
Yeah, you're back. So, I caught most of it though. I think you said the major is not too bad. And in general, if you're doing conservation, it's more like statistics. That's like roughly what you said?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of it is
Okay. All right.
statistical because you're talking about populations and things like that.
Okay,
Mhm.
nice. All right. And so next, could you tell us about your internship in Idaho? I know you said you've done that for like 2 6-month periods now,
Yeah.
and I found it really interesting. So I'm sure our
Mhm.
audience would appreciate like some of that. Like, why'd you do it also, and what was it, and what did you gain from it?
Sure. So in 2019, I went to Central Idaho for 6 months from May to October,
Hmm.
um, or is that like 5.5 months or something? And
Yeah.
I worked on the Salmon Chalice National Forest, which is a massive wilderness area. It's like the designated wilderness area of the forest is over 4 million acres. So it's just a huge wilderness. And I was able to work. I lived in the national forest, so I didn't have any cell service, limited electricity, things like that. A lot of camping, a lot of backpacking. But what we did was we worked with federal agencies to work on like public land projects. So things like habitat restoration, like restoring streams for salmon spawning, because the salmon that are born in the streams of Idaho travel all the way to the Pacific Ocean in Washington, off the coast of Washington, and then swim back.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a huge journey that many of them don't survive. So uh, those are like big, high priority animals, are like the salmon and the trout. And also things like trail work, which is, these trails that go through this huge wilderness need to be maintained, and it takes a lot of manual labor, a lot of digging, a lot of cutting trees with chainsaws, things like that.
Hmm.
But it's kind of like if you can think of it as like a Peace Corps type of program, but it's in the U.S., so you think about it as like the domestic Peace Corps.
Yeah.
And yeah, and you get a lot of, the program I did in Idaho, I got a lot of great certifications that definitely, I think, helped my career and helped me understand environmental science a lot more, especially from like a management standpoint. So I definitely recommend people do that. I did my first season in 2019 while I was in school, so I took a semester off, and then joined again the following semester. And then the second year I joined as a project leader, which, it's like a little bit better pay, a little bit more seniority position, more of like a managing position.
Hmm.
I did that for a season as well, and it was incredible. And I'm really thankful for the experience. But I encourage people to, look farther in their, like, past some of the boundaries that people might have. And, I never really thought about Idaho. It's like one of the states you don't think about until someone tells you about it,
Yeah.
and you're like,
Flyover state.
potatoes, okay. But it's like one of the most beautiful places I've
Right.
ever been. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I just wish that other people in my community would be able to experience that and understand the experience that I've had, and how that's changed me.
That's actually a really good segue into our next thing that we're talking about, um, which is environmental awareness in the Muslim community specifically. So I'm sure perhaps you didn't find a lot of mosques in rural Idaho. Um, no Muslims really. And I guess could you like kind of reflect on that experience?
Mm-hmm.
And what does it, make you wish for our community going forward in terms of
Mm-hmm.
environmental
Sure.
awareness?
Well, I don't think it's the fault of anyone that they haven't moved into. There are no Muslims in Idaho.
Sure,
I
sure.
understand that. There's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
community. I
yeah.
think there's a community in Boise, but I think that's about it.
Okay, yeah.
Um, but you know, at least from South Asia have been only coming to the U.S. for the past like 30-ish years, 35 years. So
Hmm.
I'm not surprised that they haven't moved into these rural communities.
Yeah.
But these communities have access to all this, to land, and they have a connection with the land in the way that I think we don't, because we don't have access to that, like, public land. It's called public land because it's owned by the general public. So you're allowed to camp on the land, you're allowed to hunt, you're allowed to
Mm.
fish, you're allowed to log and mine. You have to get permits and stuff, but it's called public land because
Okay.
everyone owns it, and so that there's like a collective understanding of a collective responsibility of that land that we don't have in like the urban centers. So in Chicago, I'm not in the city, but almost all of Illinois is privatized land. So if you're in any area, whether it's like put a pin down in Illinois, you're going to be on someone's land. Someone's
Hmm.
going to say, get off my lawn, or get off my
Yeah.
farm. Um,
Right.
so it gives another understanding. I think living in those communities gives people a different understanding about their connection to the land. Long story short, and I wish that more Muslims would go into more rural communities, but of course that's a lot to ask. Yeah,
Sure.
it's
But
kind of
what it,
selfish. I want to live in those communities, but
yeah.
there's no
Hmm.
Muslim. I guess I should just start like a center wherever I go.
You should start. You should be the first one, and then
Yeah, I
invite everyone. But so like, why though? I guess like, what do you think that in like raising environmental
Mhm.
awareness? Uh,
Well, part of
how
it,
does it
part of
tie in with Islam specifically? Because that's something
oh
we often don't like make that
yeah,
connection.
yeah.
But
It's
go ahead.
it's huge because, like, we talk about you know we talk about everything that was like created for us, or we marvel at the grandeur of everything that we have available to us, be it like basic resources like water and food, or like amazing landscapes that we should preserve because they're both like culturally important, and like ecologically important. But I think it's really important because I don't know. I think our land is a gift, and to me, I see it as a gift, and I think it's very arrogant for humans to destroy what was given to us. Um, and I think it's important to cherish what we have. There's a quote by Imam Jafar Sadiq. Um, There's no joy in life unless three things are available: clean, fresh air, abundant, pure water, and fertile land. So, that's just like a small quote, but those are like simple things that affect us in such an important way, because humans were, we were created on this earth, we were raised on this earth, and in that way we were kind of part of it. And I think we can learn a lot from a lot of other cultures that hold land as a lot more sacred. Most Native American cultures, I would say, as far as I know, have a very sacred place in their heart for the land, because they see as if they are part of the land, and they have a reciprocal relationship with it, and that they take from it, but they also give to it, and that they manage it in a certain way. And I think that also leads to a lot better management of the land in general, because, for example, Native Americans were doing prescribed burning, like burning prairies to promote prairie health, a lot long before, you know, the people who moved to the Americas did it, because they have that kind of understanding of the earth, and that helps them, I think, even be able to manipulate it even further, to their needs. I don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think it's very, to me, it's kind of like a spiritual importance, and I think that I just think that it's we're squandering our gift if we destroy like the only home we have. And I think that it's very cruel to the people who will be affected by things like environmental issues. So like if we don't go and help people who are affected by the floods and the, you know, droughts and things that will inevitably and are happening and will inevitably continue to happen, then we are just sitting back and letting it happen. Like the people who are the
Right.
least responsible for a lot of these climate related issues to be the most victimized. And I think we have a responsibility to prevent that from happening to the best of our ability.
Yeah, those are really good points. And as you were talking, I was thinking about something else, which is a lot of the time, like these issues, they get hyper partisan, like extremely
Yeah.
political. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so that often, once they get political, or once they like get into
Mm-hmm.
the spin cycle, it just stops progress on them. So
Right.
how do you, what have you like thought about that issue, and how do you think that we can, not as Muslims obviously, but as a whole
Right.
country, move
Right.
past politicization of
Mm-hmm.
environmental issues?
Sure. Uh, so I've thought about this a lot, because working in Idaho, it's a very red state, one of the most red states in the country. I've seen many Confederate flags there. You know, many people who are against the Forest Service and other government agencies who are there to manage the land. They're very anti-land, like land management agency, and anti-government, um, because they feel like the government is encroaching on their land. Um,
Yeah.
and it's really hard to reckon with those people, because it's important to realize that their anger, or like the people, for the people who live in these areas, these small communities that are very against like pro environmental policy, a lot of it comes because they're, I mean, maybe mistaken, but they generally, it comes from a place of like genuine care, because they know that that the land that they own, you know, will be passed down to their children or their grandchildren. And so it's kind of a family, and like a connection that it has
Yeah.
more to do with, like, I don't know, larger issues. But it's kind of hard to um
So it's not,
like reckon with that. But
it's
like
like, I'm sorry, it's not like necessarily, is it that they're like against conservation, or is it just that they're against government conservation?
well, I think well, that's the problem. It's because it's kind of been made partisan, because no one's ever had issues with, like, well, I don't want to say that. I think people have always had issues with like national reserves and things like that. Um, but I think it's partisan because of maybe a lot of like anti-environmental lobbying that has led to like it becoming like a cultural issue, like the
Hmm.
hippies that are pro, you know, tree hugging,
Hmm.
whatever. That's not necessarily,
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily have to do about the actual issues, like, oh, there's this, you know, the sage grouse is like a threatened bird. Should we put on the environmental or the Endangered Species Act? That's like a real thing. It's like a bird that was on the land that I was working on, and they
Okay.
decided not to put on the Endangered Species Act because that would require them to put aside land for this grouse. It's a bird, but the problem is that people graze their cows on this land, so you have to compromise with them, and so
Mm.
what the government decided to do with this grouse was not put on the Endangered Species Act, which means there's no legal requirement for this bird to be protected. But the local governments decided to work with landowners instead and try to save it that way. So it takes a lot of compromise, and there's a lot of legal battles and things like that. And I think a great skill for someone who wants to work in this field is to be able to talk to people who don't necessarily share their views,
Mm.
because it can be a very politicized issue.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. I know that's like a difficult topic to address sometimes, but thank you. So a few other things. We're unfortunately almost out of time and went so quickly. But I have like one more question and then kind of wrapping up. What are some of the pros and cons of this field specifically? I know you mentioned one downside might be many doomsday reports, but can you talk about pros and cons and how do you navigate the cons?
Sure. Well, pros I would say are you're able, I mean, depending on where you are in this field, but you're
Mm-hmm.
able to work in a lot of different places. And if you're a nature lover, someone who loves to live in the country, if you love like if you love working on your own or even with a team, because it's a very large field, there's a lot of opportunities for you. But could you repeat the question again? Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah.
Pros and cons of
No,
environmental.
it's okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
pros and cons
another
and
pro.
like.
Yeah, you're able to work anywhere. You're able to explore the world, and
Mm-hmm.
I think as someone who's younger and able-bodied at this point in my life, I really want to explore,
Mm-hmm.
and I relish the opportunity to work on to go to different places in the country and in the world, hopefully. But another pro would be like I think there's a great work atmosphere a lot of the times with environmental science, because the people who work in this field are passionate about it and they genuinely care about each other and
Mm.
what they're working on. So it's not just a paycheck. And speaking of
Yeah.
paychecks, a con is that it may not pay as well as like a doctor and engineer, but I mean, it's definitely something that you can live comfortably off of. If you're able to get a government job there, which there are a lot of, they have great
Yeah.
benefits packages, things like that. There's a lot of government positions
Mm.
available, but it may not be as prestigious, I guess, socially or in terms of how much you make as some of those uh, other fields. But if you're into environmental law, then you can make a lawyer's paycheck. So there's like a huge range of variety. And
Yeah.
so that one more thing you mentioned, that doomsday thing, because that's definitely something that people deal with, and it's a big part of at some point, especially early on, it's a big part of like thinking about this field, is to be like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, like what place do I have in this world? Like, you when you first learn about this stuff, it can be very scary, and I think it continues to be scary, but like I can't do it all. I can't fix any of this myself, and my individual actions are kind of minimal. Even my individual conservation actions, like recycling or planting a tree, is kind of
Mm-hmm.
small compared to, or the benefits of it. Sorry if you can hear my cat. But the benefits are
That's all
kind of
right.
small compared to. Uh, sorry, I lost my train of thought again.
You're talking about the cons, the doomsday reports, but the
Oh, right,
benefits of
yeah,
thinking
but
about those issues.
right, yeah. So you can't do it all yourself. But uh, and like I only have a limited effect on the world, personally,
Sure. Yeah.
and so I mean, all I can do is what I believe will lead the world to being a little bit better. I mean, it's hard because any of these big issues have to be solved with like massive collaboration. And
Mm-hmm.
speaking of collaboration, like I welcome any people who are interested in environmental science or working in environmental science. They want advice or want to connect. Like I definitely reach out to me, because I'd like to talk, but I'd also like there to be some kind of community of Muslims who are able to give each other advice and
Yeah.
like work with each other, and you know bring more Muslim people into the world of environmental science. I think it's pretty important that we connect, especially early on when Muslims are just kind of learning about the environmental science field. I think it's
Right.
important that people connect, and a lot. I made many friends in the environmental science field, but I've never met a Muslim.
Really?
It's
Like not
yeah.
even
Well,
one.
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think
Okay.
so. It's
Hmm.
it's a very I mean, it's a very white dominated uh, it's growing. I mean, there's a big push towards diversity, especially among like Native American tribes because of their connection with a lot of these areas. So it's a big push towards diversity, a big push towards getting people of different who have from different cultures who have different ideas about our relationship towards land and might have better ideas about how to manage our land. So another pro is that you can contribute to the growing diversity of this field, and inshallah, like help solve big problems. You can only do so much on your own, and inshallah, like all you can do is your best, and hopefully it's enough.
That's so true. Okay, speaking of advice, because you're saying that people can reach out to you for advice. What is your final piece of advice for our listeners today? And then if they do want to talk, to you specifically about this field, where can they reach you?
Sure. So I would say, like, especially for people who are interested in environmental science, I would say the best thing you can do is probably just go outside.
Okay, great.
What I would ask you, honestly,
easy.
Would be like, go to Google Maps and find your closest, forest preserve or any kind of natural area and go there. Because a lot of the times we have so many of these. I have so many of them near my house I've never been to. I've never heard about unless I looked for it. And there are these incredible, beautiful places just under my nose that I never knew about. So to build that love of the environment and a better connection with your spirituality would be to go to these places and spend time and reflect on things like that. But I would also say volunteering is definitely big. If you're able to, if you're young and you have parents who are supporting you, then I would definitely say go volunteer after school, after college. There's some really amazing internship opportunities in those like local park district jobs, things like that. Definitely do those. If you can find local nonprofits, definitely do that as well. And yeah, I would say just explore, and because the love for environmental science comes from within. It's kind of like a mushy thing to say, but it comes from within. In that it's not something you go to. It's not a field you go in if you just want to. If you're not really thinking about what you're doing and you're not really passionate about it. So the passion comes first, in my opinion. So I would say go outside, enjoy your time.
Great. Thank you for the advice. And then how can people reach out to you if they would like to, talk about this field and maybe they're interested?
You can, I have an Instagram. If you can just reach me on that. Okay. Is there a way I can say it, or I can spell it out? It's
yes, you can say it. Yeah.
Oh, QAIMOO _. So my name is Qaim. It's Qaim _. Sorry, fire alarm's going on. Anyway, that's all I had to say.
Okay, great. Yeah. So that's how they can reach you, right? Just message you.
Just message me, friend. Awesome. Me, whatever you want.
Okay, thank you. So thank you so much, Brother Qaim, for your advice today. I hope our listeners, learned a lot, and hopefully some people will reach out to you and say that they're interested, so we can get some more Muslims into this field.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course. And thank you, all of our listeners, for tuning into the uMentor Talk Show. Tune into our show next week, next Saturday, 3 p.m. for another interview. And if you enjoyed the show today, again, please consider supporting our talk show at umojaarch.org/donate or through the Umoja app. Remember, you can always catch our previous episodes on YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and also our website shortly after the show. And that's it for today. Thank you. Umoja Outreach Foundation, uniting and empowering the Shia community.